Good evening and welcome to Colorado Decides, a joint production of Colorado Public Television, CBS 4, KOA News Radio, and the Colorado Sun. I'm your host, Dominic Duzzuti. Thank you very much for joining us. Joining me tonight is political analyst Eric Sonderman. Tonight, we continue our general election season looking at the major races on November's ballot. This debate will feature the major party candidates running for state treasurer of Colorado. Joining us for the next 30 minutes are Brian Watson, the Republican candidate, and Dave Young, the Democratic candidate. Gentlemen, we have limited time, so let's get started. Eric, you're up first.
Yes, welcome. Thanks for being here. One of you, whoever wins this election, I think is likely to join either Governor Polis or Governor Stapleton in probably presiding as part of your term over an economic downturn. You have to believe that there's a correction coming at some point in time. As the state treasurer, how do you prepare for such an eventuality? It's easy to govern during good times. What do you do to govern and run that office during bad times? Dave, why don't we start with you?
Well, thanks for the question, Eric. I think that's a reality that we're going to witness a downturn at some point. That's just the reality of economics in the country and the world. The staff that actually has been in the Treasurer's office for some time, many of them are still there from the last downturn. And I think we witnessed the fact that Colorado fared well during the last downturn. And some of the things that they did was they diversified the portfolio to ensure that we didn't have a lot of investments that were in any one bank or any one particular investment tool. And you know, I'm going to rely heavily on the expertise that's in that office to advise me, and then we have an outcome, and my job is as treasurer to ensure that the money is safe. That's top priority, and it is transparently invested and wisely invested with some return coming. But at the end of the day, safety is the #1 issue that we have to focus on in the Treasurer's office. And so I will be looking for that kind of outcome and advising and doing the oversight of the staff in the office to ensure that we're achieving that outcome.
And Brian?
Well, I think I can add a lot of experience here, and this is where it's a defining difference between my opponent and I. During the last economy, I founded my company 18 years ago, and during the last downturn, I was fighting through it. And so I understand what goes up comes down. And if you look at all the economic forecasts, there's on the horizon in 12 to 18 months a downturn. And so we need to have a treasurer who actually has experience. I disagree with my opponent's statement just now that he said Colorado fared well. Give an example. PERA in the down economy lost 11% of its value. Doesn't sound like a lot because we were all hit pretty hard during the Great Recession. But in PERA terms, that was over $20 billion. That would increase the unfunded liability. So we need a state treasurer who actually has real world investment experience, who can add a lot of value there, and that's the kind of experience I can bring to the table.
Gentlemen, I want to talk about...
If I could follow up on that.
Dave.
You know, the reality is that the treasurer actually controls about $6.5 or $7 billion in the treasury pool. And I think your question was maybe directed towards that. I'm happy to talk about PERA at some point, Eric.
We'll get into it.
I would imagine we would get into it. But, you know, when I said that the treasurer's office fared well during the last downturn, it was that treasury pool that came out in the black. There were only 2 states, in fact, in the country that came out in the black. So I think the expertise is in the treasurer's office to manage those funds that are specifically under the control of the treasurer. As you know, the treasurer sits as one of 16 voting members on the PERA board. Certainly I'll play an active role in monitoring and providing my insights as how PERA is invested. We'll get into that.
But as a rebuttal to the rebuttal, just to make sure we're clear, one of the key responsibilities of the state treasurer, there's 3 of them, and that is to serve on that PERA board. And so we need to make sure someone who's going to be active, not just sitting back and monitoring.
We're certainly going to get to that. I want to step back a little bit because I've heard a lot about the treasurer takes care of the state's investments, the state's money, but how much of that care of where investments can really go is already dictated by law? It's not as if the state treasurer is going to sit back and do some day trading. So how much real decision making is there of to one degree or another that a state treasurer has control over of how liberal we can be, not in the political sense, but in the investment sense, with the state's money? Brian, I'm going to start with you.
Well, the state treasurer has to be conservative and has to be a good steward of the people's money. You're absolutely correct. The state treasurer's role is not to go out and try to get double-digit returns on the state's money. So there's short-term cash, and for that, you need to make sure that those are liquid instruments so that when the state needs to write a check, which is called a warrant, making sure that check can be cashed. And so, yes, modest returns, very conservative. But then there's also, again, the PERA board and helping to pick the investment managers and the investment decisions. And again, that's really important.
Dave.
Yeah, you know, there's statutory guidelines and guardrails on what the Treasurer's Office can do with the Treasury pool. And so there's limited wiggle room there, and rightfully so. Again, I mentioned earlier, you want that money safe, and you want it to be there when the warrant has to be written. It has to be liquid. And so there is some latitude in, particularly in some maturities on corporate paper and corporate bonds. If you stagger those well, you can really manage the liquidity of the Treasury pool so that money is available when it needs to be written for a check. But on the other side of the coin, well-managed cash management really results in good productivity as well. At the end of the day, you want the money safe, and that's where the guardrails and the statutes are really designed to ensure that that happens.
Eric, you're up next.
Well, you both have brought up the word PERA, so let's go there.
Sure.
For our viewers' benefit, full disclosure, in years way gone by, I did some consulting work for PERA. More recently, I've been involved in efforts to bring some reform to the PERA system, so disclosure out there. Number of questions, but let's start with just the governance of PERA. Last I looked, it's a 16-member board. As one of you referred to, 13 of those 16 members of the board are members of the PERA system and beneficiaries of PERA. Is that appropriate? And if not, how would you use your influence to change that? Do we have a foxes in hen house kind of problem? I don't know who's first. I think Dave's first on this.
Dave's turn.
You know, I think that it's appropriate the way it's put together now. I think my opponent is going to disagree with me on that, has in the past. But at the end of the day, it's incumbent upon the PERA board and the members of the PERA board to have the long view of how, in fact, PERA is managed. And again, the state legislature sets up the benefit structure and the contributions that come in from employers and employees. It is up to the PERA board to really manage what they're given to get the best outcome, to make sure that we have funding available for benefits and we aren't leaving our seniors out in the cold. So if you go back in history, all the way back to the 1970s, PERA was at about the same level of funding that it is now. And over the course of 30 years, through good management and the same composition of the board, essentially, they managed up to about 105% funding. And so I think, you know, if you have the right people on the board and they have that long view of good management, you can achieve good results.
Right.
So as I've said throughout my entire campaign, PERA for me is a people issue and shouldn't be a partisan political issue. It really breaks my heart that people in our state legislature have really made PERA a political punching bag and blaming things on them in terms of performance, in terms of the $30 billion unfunded obligation. The first thing I'm going to do when elected treasurer is call every single PERA board member and take them out for a cup of coffee or lunch and get to know them as people, regardless of their political affiliation, and figure out what ideas they have and how we can actually go out and fix PERA. Keep in mind that one of my campaign pledges is not to take a salary from the government when elected. I want to do my part to try to reduce the cost and burden of government. The reason why that's important as it relates to serving on the PERA board, because I'm not going to be accepting a salary, thus I'm not going to be receiving PERA. And so I do care about the 600,000 people on PERA, and it's vitally important that we fix it because it's a people issue. But I also care about the people of Colorado and to make sure that we don't have people who are voting with their own wallets or pocketbooks in mind, but people who are really voting for the health and sustainability of PERA because it is a people issue.
It's a big enough issue. We should stay there for a couple of questions. My question would be, I realize that your first step would be to take the board out for a cup of coffee, which is admirable, but the job of the state treasurer is going to be to actually try to see some policy reforms happen at some time during one of your tenures. That's going to take work with the legislature. That's going to take work with senators, representatives, folks that are in a partisan environment. If something's going to happen, it's going to need to be worked in that environment. What's your experience in working in that environment to actually see some reform happen?
Yeah.
We'll start with you.
So if you look at my entire career, it's about building bridges and tearing down barriers among people, whether it be nonprofit world, the political world, and in my business. And so I'm going to work with the legislature as well, regardless of one's political affiliation, because you know what? This stuff matters. You know, one aspect of PERA and reform. So on the last day of session, we had the largest reform bill in PERA history, Senate Bill 200. It had the most bipartisan support of the bills in the last decade, and everyone believes it was a step in the right direction to reform PERA. Sadly, my opponent decided to vote against it. That's not the kind of leadership we need in the state treasurer's office. We need a state treasurer who's actually going to show up. My opponent says he didn't have enough information on that day to make the vote, but yet he made other votes that day that he had enough information on. And this is something that we've been talking about the entire legislative session. So it concerns me a great deal. Are you talking about fixing it, or are you actually going to go do it? And I want to be the state treasurer who goes and makes a positive difference on behalf of the people of Colorado.
Dave?
Well, I think my opponent's inexperience in the legislature is glaringly obvious at this point. I've been on the Joint Budget Committee for the last 4 years and in the legislature for the past 7, representing a very diverse House district up in Greeley in Weld County. I work with people on both sides of the aisle. I work with a very diverse group of constituents up in northern Colorado. And I've had the experience on the Joint Budget Committee of working with my other 2 Democratic colleagues and then 3 Republican colleagues. And we work very closely together. I have deep experience. I bring deep experience and an understanding of the budget, $30 billion budget that I've been managing for the last 4 years. And then I also have worked very carefully across the aisle. Over 120 bills that I've passed in the past 7 years, and most of them have been bipartisan and really designed to solve really thorny problems that we have in the legislature. So I stand ready on day one to step into that role. I bring deep experience with both the budget and legislative experience to really actually build those bridges. I've already got the relationships. I'm ready to go to actually move an agenda. So the agenda that I would like to see happen is not to upset Senate Bill 200's solution of a funding horizon in 30 years. I think that's good. I voted against the bill because we didn't have the financials in front of us on the day that we were asked to vote. It was really literally the 11th hour, 11:54 p.m. And the treasurer should always work from the numbers, and we did not have the numbers. I am not going to run the treasurer's office on a guess. We're going to always have the financials. We're going to look at them, and we're going to establish a decision based on the numbers as to whether or not a solution is viable or not for PERA. It's too important. This overfunding that we had in the year 2000, it was just slightly at 105%. Very good situation for PERA, and bad decisions were made in the year 2000 that caused the slide that we see now. The treasurer at the time should have stood up and should have said, this is a bad decision, didn't look at the financials.
Dave,
so my opponent, if I may say, he's right. He is a career politician looking for the next paid political job. And when we're talking about bipartisan support, these very people who served on the Joint Budget Committee, who supposedly handled these bills with him, et cetera, not one of them on the other side of the aisle has stood up and endorsed his candidacy. In my campaign, we've had bipartisan support across the state, prominent Democrats. We just got the Boulder Weekly endorsement. I was the only Republican that they endorsed out of the entire slate across the state. Same thing with the Pueblo Chieftain. So again, I'm going to go in and focus on a fresh outsider's approach, break down barriers, and go ahead and build relationships.
Let me ask you a particular question as a follow-up there, and then throw it right back to Eric. SB 200, you've had time to consider it. You've looked at it. What would your vote be if you were voting today on SB 200 as written?
My first read.
Let's go to Dave first.
As written, now that I've had a chance to look at the financials, that I would be a yes on it, but with the caveat that we need to come back and we need to look at both the...
It would be a yes vote.
It would be a yes vote.
Brian?
I'm glad he said yes now because he voted against it. He also made a statement the other day that supposedly he now feels that Senate Bill 200, that he didn't vote for, is going to solve the PERA problem in 30 years. No one believes that in the state. It's a step in the right direction. So I would have voted for it, but I also believe we need to have additional items to go ahead and actually make this healthy and solvent for the people.
I'll give you a chance to stay on Senate Bill 200. We're not going to take the whole half hour on PERA, but we may come close. One specific aspect of Senate Bill 200 was to expand the opportunity for some public employees, not a requirement, just an opportunity, to have more of a 401k style option Again, option, not requirement. It would still be a pension for most employees. There's one huge carve out for that option, and that is for public school teachers. If you're a highway worker, a court bailiff, whatever, you can have that option of a 401k style plan, but not if you're a public school teacher. Is that appropriate, and why should public school teachers be in a special category, unlike highway workers or court bailiffs? Brian, why don't we go to you?
So as I said, PERA for me is a people issue. It's about my sister, who's a school teacher up in the Boulder Valley School District, working hard every day, hoping there's going to be retirement for her. And so I believe we need to look at hybrid systems and empower people with choice and their own decision making as it relates to it. So having a more 401k style program, whether it be for teachers or any other public employee, we should empower them with their financial future and come alongside them and let them help direct that.
Do you agree, Dave? Should public school teachers have that kind of an option?
I think it dilutes the pension program, frankly, and I think it's the wrong direction to go. All other private sector employees have Social Security. You may disagree that it's a viable pension program, but they have a sustainable income coming in retirement that keeps them hopefully out of poverty. We need to work on Social Security to ensure that that happens. PERA actually started before Social Security, so it's a replacement for Social Security. Teachers and other first responders and public employees don't have access to the Social Security system. So there's an equity there. If we have a defined benefit plan for our private sector, we need to have one for our public sector as well. Trying to replace the defined benefit or pension plan with a 401k style program just dilutes it, and it actually leaves people at great risk during market downturns of not having a sustainable income in retirement.
Real quick follow-up to address to Dave. By that rationale, then, should other public employees, higher ed, court workers, et cetera, not have that option either?
Well, I think that the option of supplementing the defined benefit plan, if they have additional income that they want to put into a 401k style retirement plan, is fine. But to replace it with a 401k style, I think puts people at risk. I want to come back to a couple of things that were said earlier. One is, I hope we'll return to my opponent's statement about not taking a salary. Because I think it presents a great ethical problem, a great conflict of interest that we're going to have to explore. I don't want that to go by. And then I also want to talk a little bit about the fact that, yes, I would be a vote now, yes vote on Senate Bill 200, but there are a couple of things within there that I think really need to be addressed. And I want to take a step back. When you look at the fact that we have 3,000 vacancies in the state of Colorado in the teaching ranks today, that's a signal that we don't have a compensation system that is attracting and retaining the people that we want to have in our classrooms. And when we have that kind of vacancy rate, we have to question, why is that happening? Certainly we know from all the news media that teachers are highly underpaid, and that we need to improve that. But their retirement system is part of that compensation system as well. And if we keep tweaking solutions to look narrowly at how we fund PERA, but we don't look at the big picture of how we actually address the attract or retain issue, we're going to actually create a bigger problem by not doing the right thing. So we need to look at the retirement, we need to look at retirement age, and we need to look at cost.
Got it. Well,
yeah.
so to Brian's response and
Yeah.
specifically about PERA as a recruitment tool.
Yeah. So there's a fundamental difference between my opponent and I. He believes in big government, and government knows best. He wants to take away choice, whether it be for teachers or others, and how they can be empowered to invest their dollars. He even has said that he doesn't like TABOR, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. I'm all about empowering Coloradans with choice, and for them to speak up to the government to say, no, we don't think you should continue to spending off the rails and spending all of our money. So it's a fundamental difference of how we view the role of government, and the voters are clearly seeing that in this election.
That's an excellent segue, because we're going to get into that right now. Our friends at AARP offer questions for all of our candidates, and their question for the treasurers is, Colorado's budget is uniquely constricted by sometimes conflicting constitutional amendments that restrict taxes on one hand and raise them on the other. What ideas do you have for balancing these conflicting amendments so there is adequate revenue available in our state to provide essential services to the rapidly growing number of older adults and their families? Brian, we'll start with you.
So what we're referring to here is regards to TABOR, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, and the Gallagher Amendment, which caps the amount that residential properties can pay on taxes. And so you're right, these are coming against each other, and it's of concern to me. We absolutely have to figure out solutions. We need to make sure in our legislature that they have priority in where we're going to be spending money. I'll give you an example that concerns me. You look at where fuel taxes may be going with driverless cars coming online. You look at how I'm in commercial real estate, how the use of office space, and you look at the Gallagher Amendment of what that's going to have an impact. So these are issues we absolutely have to address, but I think it first and foremost comes with setting our priorities straight in the legislature of where we're going to spend that money, and then making sure we adjust the taxes appropriately. I am against just increasing taxes or taking away people's choice and rights before the government becomes a better steward of what we've entrusted them with. They have to do that first.
Dave, address the ARP question.
Well, because these amendments are in our Colorado constitutions, the reality is that only the voters can make a change to those. And that's the correct process. I spent a lot of time in my House district talking with people who are my constituents in that district up in Greeley. And what I hear most often, let's just talk about K-12 education, they're willing to invest in their K-12 education, but they want to be sure they get a return on investment. They want to make sure that students are learning more effectively and are prepared for the workforce. And so they want both things to happen. And so if it's in the hands of the voters to make these changes, I think we need to be listening to them, not just the legislature. We need to be listening directly to the voters and finding out what outcomes do you want in the state of Colorado, and how are we going to know, what are we going to measure to ensure that we're actually achieving those outcomes. If we can build voter confidence that they can make changes, and we do need to make Tabor and Gallagher work better together, if we can actually make them work better together, then in fact I think we're going to begin to invest in ourselves and move our state forward effectively so that we can deliver essential services to everybody in the state.
I'm glad to hear my opponent say that, because on the campaign trail he has stated that he does not like Tabor and he wants to take away people's choice, and I do believe in going to the voters. Well, it's clear on your website as well, and so I just think we need to make sure that we have our priorities straight as a state, and that we do empower the people with the choice.
We have just a short time before our closing statement, so we'll ask you for shorter answers in this one. Eric?
Shorter answer, please. Let's talk about transparency in the Treasurer's office. Do you believe there's room for improved transparency? Previous treasurer had some program called STAR, a receipt where you could see where your tax dollars went. What would your particular ideas be for transparency about the state budget process, Brian?
I think, is he first?
Yeah,
Dave, do you want to go first?
Dave, go ahead.
Sure. I would reinstitute the STAR reports that were started under Kerry Kennedy's administration there in that treasurer's office. They've fallen off. I think the last one was 2011. I think they need to be expanded. We've done some work on the Joint Budget Committee to make the budget more transparent by having a lot of documents online, but I think that there are a lot of times a lot of information doesn't necessarily result in good understanding on the part of the taxpayers and the voters about what's really going on in the Treasurer's office or in general in the state government. So I think I would like to take what was started, but really expand it and make it much more effective and readable.
So absolutely, you have to have transparency and light, especially when you're dealing with financial matters. First thing I'm going to do when going into the Treasurer's office is sit the 30-person staff down and ask them a very simple but important question. Who is our customer? I want to make sure that they understand that the customer is the people of Colorado. It's not the halls of government, it's not lobbyists, etc. It is the people of Colorado. And every day, figure out how we can become better, smarter, and faster to serve the people of Colorado, and transparency is absolutely a key part of that.
Half an hour goes by very fast in the studio, so we're off to our closing statements. What we do is offer a 1-minute closing statement to each of our candidates. We flip a coin before the debate to determine the order. Dave, you'll be our first 1-minute closing statement. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to do this, and thanks to the viewers for actually tuning in. This is very important. I think that there's a clear difference between my opponent and myself. I bring deep experience from my work managing the state's $30 billion budget on the Joint Budget Committee. I understand the complexities of the state's finances, and I will bring that understanding, that skill level to the Treasurer's office to make sure that we have a very effective, very smooth running office there for the service to the state of Colorado. My opponent has said he is not going to give up his day job managing an investment portfolio, a clear conflict of interest that should raise red flags for voters because it's an ethical lapse that should not exist in the Treasurer's office. My job as Treasurer will make sure that your money is safe, transparently invested, and is productive. And I will work very diligently with PERA in order to make sure that we're not leaving our seniors out in the cold in retirement. And we didn't really touch on the great Colorado payback, but it's not working so well. And one of my first jobs is going to be to get in there and make sure we reunite our Colorado citizens with our property.
Thank you, Dave. Brian, it's your turn for your 1-minute closing statement.
I want to thank everybody for listening in. You know, I think it's really important that you do a job interview for the Treasurer's office. Put aside political affiliations and decide who's best for the job. You know, I grew up in humble means on the western slope of Colorado in Olathe, went to school at CU, started a company 18 years ago, and I've been investing capital and managing capital now for 2 decades. My opponent is a career politician looking for the next paid political job. He does not have any investment experience, and he's made some very concerning statements in terms of being an activist, a political activist in the Treasurer's office. I am here to serve the people. Yes, I have a campaign pledge not to accept a salary from the government because I want to do my part to serve the people of Colorado. I would be truly honored to earn your vote, and you can learn more at brianwatson.vote. Thank you.
That is all the time we have for our debate featuring the major party candidates running for State Treasurer of Colorado. I'd like to thank our candidates, Brian and Dave. Brian Watson and Dave Young, as they'll appear on the ballot. I'd also like to thank my fellow panelist, Eric Sonderman. If you'd like to find out more information about this year's general election issues and races, please visit our websites. There's quite a few. CPT12.org, CBSDenver.com, KOANewsRadio.com, and ColoradoSun.com. Be sure to stay tuned as we continue our Both Sides of the Story high school debate tournament. Tonight we offer the 3rd place match. Students from Denver East and George Washington High School debate if local governments in Colorado have the right to pass anti-camping bans to prevent homeless persons from congregating and living in certain areas. I think you'll be astonished at what you're going to see. For everyone here at Colorado Public Television, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.